Hello, listeners and viewers. This is Nicholas with DIVO-Ted Talks, and I'm coming to you here today, actually sitting right next to our weight towers. And I was thinking about the fact that we utilize resistance training to build our muscles so that we have a more functional body, right? A sedentary body doesn't require a lot of functional pieces. And then if you give it poor nutrition on top of losing functional pieces because they're not utilized, then the system completely implodes and falls in on itself. So one of the things we talk about in the Bikram series, which is 26 and 2, which we utilize as our inspiration for the studio here. It's a fantastic series, but it has something at the beginning that opened my mind to this possibility of having resistance training in other realms of your world, metaphorically speaking, right? But this one actually is physical, but you're doing resistance training when you're doing the breathing exercise. You breathe in so hard with your diaphragm that you can actually hear the air as it goes in, and then you release all that tension by opening the air tube, right, your trachea, and allowing the air to flow freely out. That was a tongue twister. And at first I was like, oh, yeah, it's resistance training. But the more that I've returned to it and taught it as of late, I can really see how that does build up the strength, mind, body, and spirit, right? Because mentally, I'm learning how to work with the resistance that I'm experiencing by pulling my diaphragm and having a restriction about how much air can go in at one time. I mean, you don't want your mucous membranes to be completely exposed to the outside air, especially in winter. It would just dry you out completely. But that's a whole nother world and story. That being said, resistance training is the nature of life, right? We come up against things that we have to adapt to and build up strength for, either to return to or to continue walking forward through, right? Grief is a huge example of that, at least in my world, right? It transforms you as a person because it is such a hard, challenging, resistance-filled road to travel after you lose somebody very close to you or someone very special to you. And that's just one example. But like mental resistance training, learning in the school system, being able to critically think and learn from more of a liberal arts education. And there's nothing wrong with having mechanical and very technical skilled knowledge, right? But how can you take that knowledge integratively into other aspects of your life? Could knowing how to fix a car help you live a better life because you understand the functional mechanics of relationships, either in a romantic relationship or in a familial relationship or even beyond that, right? Governmental or societal. Yeah, I could probably go down that road for a long time, but I'll rein it back in. And so what are these resistance trainings? It is anything that pushes us up against limitations or particular fixed positions, right? And I say fixed only to say that it's at a certain point right now, but through work, it can be modified either to a greater extent or maybe potentially without use to a lesser extent. But it's these inflection points where we find fatigue because we haven't built up the endurance or stamina to do that, either through nourishing or practice or both. And so when we come up to these resistance type moments, how are you reacting to them? Are you trying to avoid them, right? Are you taking the path of least resistance? And that's our natural state of being. We are mostly water, and water's one of its main characteristics is moving through the path of least resistance. It will go where it is able to, and it will stick together as it does so through a cohesive action. And that's because of its polarities, and we could get into all the science of it. If I wanted to, I could jump into chemistry and physics and Yeah, but I own a yoga studio and restorative fitness, personal training, and semi-private studio. You know, life happens. But one of the most recent resistance training exercises I had was opening a business. The construction limitations, whether it was cost or supplies or work timelines or fire marshals, the city, other restraints that couldn't be anticipated. Like it was just a lot. And then I opened my doors, and all of a sudden I was a business owner after not being a business owner to this level before. Having a brick and mortar is a very different experience than having a virtual or a sole proprietorship in which you travel around and do things. So all of a sudden, I was being, through resistance, forced to step up against areas in which I was deficient or weak or slower or not quite as adapted. I think that's a great word, right? How adapted are you to the thing that you're doing? And through resistance, you can gain greater adaptation because the body is always going to adapt specifically to the imposed demands. The S.A.I.D principle is one of my favorite principles that I ever learned in personal training and fitness was specific adaptations to imposed demands. And our body will always do that. Expose skin to sun, and if it doesn't get burnt, it's going to the degree that it's capable, build a tan. Right? And some people are less able to do that, and that has its own implications. But some people have more melanin, and therefore it is automatically something that happens within them in reaction to the sun. And as these people get to know themselves, they realize this and know this about themselves and come to interact with life with the knowledge that they've gained from that. That's the easiest one. But, talking about drinking alcohol, right? Our bodies adapt to the alcohol as it's consumed over time and depending on the quantities to help make sure that the body stays in homeostasis. And so people can build up a tolerance over time to the point that they're drinking stuff or amounts that, the person who took the first drink never would have been able to handle and probably would have been sick or whatever you want to describe it as. We do it with weights, right? And so how many dimensions of our life are you taking the path of least resistance rather than going headlong into the resistance so that you can build the adaptation necessary to do that? I mean, some people literally only work out to look good or because of what people think about a person who has a body like that. But if you ask them to run a mile, could they do it? Some of them could, right? But sometimes there's only people who, this is the only thing I do and I can only do that, and they're a runner and they don't do anything else and they don't want to touch weights, they don't want to do these other things. And so following the path of least resistance, if you always do what you've always done, sadly, you'll always have what you have now, just maybe a little bit older. So sometimes I loop around, but the ultimate point in this discussion is specific adaptations to imposed demands will dictate the effects of any resistance training that you are engaging in. So if you want to get better at tolerating stressful situations, you have to go into stressful situations. If you want to deal with being in crowds of people that normally make you anxious and upset, you have to go around that. You have to face your fears, more or less, in this regard. Now, it's not necessarily a fear. It could literally just be, I don't want to lift weights, right? You are engaging the resistance that you're experiencing, whether it is a resistance in your willpower, a resistance in physical ability, your mental ability, or your spiritual ability, right? How capable are you of doing whatever it is we're talking about? And so, my wish for you is that you start to see the world more in a context of adaptation, and through resistance training, that is possible. And it doesn't have to be lifting weights, although it could be. Till next time, I'm Nicholas.